specialist in the Reno office, and I'm joined today by Stephanie Montgomery, our grants and projects analysts,
Good morning.
and Michelle Patrick, our community arts development specialist in our Las Vegas office.
Good morning, everyone.
And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel shortly after this presentation. Our contact info is on the slide right here, and we'll also put it in the chat. And the last 15 to 20 minutes will be reserved for questions, and we'll respond to as many as we can. So today's webinar will cover the ins and outs of the project grant for organizations and the operational support grant. And thank you again for attending today's webinar. I'll hand it over to Stephanie to lead us through the first part of this presentation.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Okay, so in this first part, we're going to go over just some kind of key information for the two grants that we are covering in depth today, the project grant for organizations and the operating support grant. So just a side-by-side comparison of the two grants before we jump into some of those deeper details, just to be aware of the due dates. The project grant for organizations, or PGO, due this year, February 3rd by 5 p.m. Pacific time. The operating support grant, or OSG, due July 1 by 5 p.m. And that is a little later than last year, so just be aware of that difference. And then the funding difference, PGO up to $7,000 with in-kind or cash match required. OSG up to $50,000. It is a 2-year grant. We'll talk about that. That would be up to $25,000 per year. And that is based on your total annual revenue, how much you can apply for. And that is also a 1-to-1 cash match or in-kind required. So PGO open to nonprofit organizations and public institutions for creative projects that take place during our fiscal year, which is July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. OSG is open to Nevada Incorporated 501c3 nonprofits, arts organizations. It does have to be in your mission. We'll talk about that. And again, it is a 2-year period of support from July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2027. And there is an interim report required at the beginning of the second year. For both grants and for all of our grants, if you are an organization, you are required to have a unique entity identifying number through sam.gov. That is a requirement of the federal government. So you got to have that UEI number assigned. It does not have to be active. We have received updated guidance from the NEA on that. Okay, so just again to go a little bit in depth on yourself as an applicant organization. If you are a nonprofit organization, you must have that federal tax exempt status. So from the Internal Revenue Service, and we cannot accept fiscal agents. That is, again, a federal requirement from the NEA. And you have to have active, at the time of application, active incorporation status with the Nevada Secretary of State, showing your good standing. And we do check that independently. If you are a public institution applying for the project grant for organizations, so this applies to PGO only because public institutions are not eligible for the operating support grant. Just keep in mind that individual schools and libraries that are within the same district or within the same system may apply independently, but you have to have your own budget and your own facility. Likewise, for colleges, there can be no more than one grant application per fiscal year from the same academic department. So be sure to coordinate with colleagues. And just in general, the projects must serve the broad community outside of the institution and generate area-wide arts involvement. And the grant may not support internal programs. So again, looking for those creative projects. Okay, so just to kind of, again, get a comparison of all of our grants that you may be eligible for as an organization. Again, please be careful to read the guidelines. You can find all of our guidelines by going to our website, grants FY26 grant offerings. And this is just a little comparison for you to see what you might be eligible for as an organization and what grants can be paired together. You are welcome to apply for any grants for which you're eligible, but you may only receive a certain combination of grants per year. And please reach out if you have any questions about that. I know it can be a little bit confusing, right, to wade through that. But just to kind of give you a sense, right, if you're planning to apply for a project grant for organizations, you are also eligible to apply for our Arts Learning Express grant, meaning, you could get up to $10,000 annually. If you're planning to apply for an operating support grant, you can also apply for an arts learning project grant for up to $7,000 annually, plus what your OSG level would be. So if your annual revenue falls within these levels, and there are some other requirements to be eligible for the operating support grant, which we will go over. But if your annual revenue falls within these levels, you would choose which level, and that is the amount that you can request. So we have a lot of folks that pair, for example, the project grant for organizations with Arts Learning Express grants, or an operating support grant with an Arts Learning project grant. We're happy to speak with you individually if you have a question about how to pair those grants together successfully. Okay. So some distinguishing features to kind of compare the intent of the project grant for organizations and the operating support grant. So for the project grant for organizations, or PGO, again, that's open to any nonprofit or public institution, so long as the project is arts related. This is also open to border states, so long as for nonprofits in border states, so long as the majority of the project serves Nevada communities and all of the awarded funds from the Nevada Arts Council go to support Nevada communities. But we do have grantees from border states. Your applications are evaluated in 3 areas for the project grant for organizations: project planning and management, community impact on artistic merit, and then artistic excellence. And we will go over those more in depth later in the webinar. Your funds for the project grant for organizations can be used for relevant project expenses, especially project administrative personnel and consultants, though there is a limit on the percentage that you can apply for. It's up to 10% of the grant amount. Artist fees, contractor fees, facility costs, consumable materials and supplies, production expenses, marketing and promotion, and travel, but just very specifically only accommodation and transportation. Food and drink per diem cannot be included in travel expenses. Now, compared to the operating support grant, this is only open to arts-focused nonprofits. It has to be in their mission, and only open to those nonprofits in the state of Nevada. Your applications are evaluated on organizational capacity and management, artistic excellence, and community impact artistic merit. Again, we'll go over what that means in detail later on in the webinar. So your funds for the operating support grant can be used to support general operating expenses. So that includes things like administrative salaries and benefits, payroll expenses, insurance, facility space rental, utilities, contracted and professional services. You can kind of see that the project grant for organizations is a project-based grant. The operating support grant is for operating expenses. Okay, so again, just to really emphasize the difference between the two, that the PGO really is about arts and culture projects during that fiscal year, that period of performance, and it can be used for discrete costs that are related to the project. So an example is facility costs to rent space for an arts and culture project. An example of eligible project for the PGO would be something like a community theater wanting to host a weekend event in a park and requesting funding to rent out that pavilion, compensate participating artists with artist fees. It is a specific project with these kind of discrete expenses that are directly related to the project. For the operating support grant, It's really more focused on operational costs. So an example of funding or an allowable expense rather would be salaries of staff, general facilities costs for administrative office work. An example might be an art gallery that is requesting funds to pay rent for the building that they're in. So that would be throughout the fiscal year, not necessarily related to a specific project, but rather their general operating expenses. Okay, so that's kind of a broad overview to help you compare the PGO and OSG. Now we're going to go a little bit more in depth into the project grant organizations and kind of drill down a little bit into specifically what the PGO grant is intended for. So again, this grant is for supporting arts and cultural projects with community impact. As we said, it's up to $7,000 that you can request. There is a one-to-one cash or in-kind match required. So if you requested $7,000 in grant funds, you would have to show $7,000 in matching cash or in-kind donations. That grant cycle window, that is the time period in which the project must take place, is July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2026, which is our fiscal year 26. So this supports the activities of both nonprofit organizations and public institutions, the execution of an arts and culture project or projects, and just some examples of eligible projects that have been funded in the past, things like art exhibitions, performances, readings, festivals, all of these would be potentially eligible. Just to really drive home that though, of course, you can plan in advance outside of that grant cycle window, and some components of the project may take place outside that grant window. The portions of the project that are paid for with project grant for organizations, grant funds must occur during the grant cycle, and you are required to submit receipts to the grants team who review those receipts, and we cannot accept receipts for any grant funded expenses outside of that grant cycle window. So something to just be really careful about. Make sure that you're keeping your receipts, make sure that they are incurred and paid for during that grant cycle window. Okay. Just to also, drill down a little bit into what we mean by relevant project expenses. If you ever have any questions about what might be a relevant project expense, maybe what category of ours, of these categories that I've already mentioned, it can go into, please feel free to reach out. I'll just emphasize again that for travel, it can be accommodation and transportation only, no food and drink, no per diem, and that is a federal and state rule. So to be clear, the above, we've already gone over what PGO expenses can be used for, but to be clear, we also have some restricted things that PGO funds may not be used for. Things like classes, workshops, arts learning activities, those kinds of projects really should be directed to the Arts Learning Project Grant. And indeed, we do redirect folks sometimes if we feel that the project is not eligible. So if it is arts learning focused, if there is a substantial educational aspect, please speak to us about potentially applying for an arts learning project grant. For general operating support, again, this is not allowable for project grant for organizations. That would be for operating support grantees. Just be aware that you cannot have receive a project grant for organizations and an operating support grant in the same fiscal year, okay? Purchase of permanent equipment exceeding $1,000. So there's a $1,000 limit on permanent equipment. So that would be something that, has a longevity well beyond the grant cycle, the project, not something like a consumable materials or supplies, things like, if you were doing some kind of a painting project, things like paint and paper and brushes and things like that, that would be considered consumable. And very importantly, this is in fact a rule for all of our grants, but because we have seen some issues specifically with the project grant for organizations, our funds cannot be used to support fundraising that benefits the applicant organization as a whole. So it cannot be used for galas or for events that are fundraising events for the organization as a whole. Of course, you may raise funds for the project, that is allowable, but you may not use our funds to have a fundraising event or activities with that project to benefit the organization as a whole. And again, we're very happy to talk about that if you have any questions about what that entails. Okay. For applicant eligibility, we just want to stress that for those nonprofit organizations, as we've mentioned, have to be in Nevada or a border state. There are more requirements for a border state having that project serve Nevada communities. It has to be the majority of the project, 75%, and all our funds would have to go to support those activities in Nevada communities. You have to have your tax exempt status from the IRS. You have to have your UEI from SAM.gov. You have to be actively incorporated with the Nevada Secretary of State. You may not also be a current operating support grantee in that same fiscal year. But just to stress again that any nonprofit can apply for this arts related project. So you don't have to have arts in your mission to apply for the project grant for organizations. Okay. What you will find in the application, just to kind of prepare yourself, and it is open right now, so you can open it up, take a look, start an application. You will have to fill out an eligibility form, just confirming a few details that you're eligible. If you have any questions about that, reach out. That is new this year. Narrative questions in the PGO application this year will ask about your mission, your history, very specific details about the project, including things such as who is managing the project, the artists that are participating in the project. You will have to provide a budget of how you will use the grant funds, and also a full project budget that shows your income, your expenses, and your in-kind for the whole project, not just what grant funds would potentially pay for. You do have to provide artistic work samples that are related to the project or that might show how artistic work that could be, a model for the project. And there are areas to also upload things such as marketing and publicity samples, evaluation forms, contracts, letters of agreement, any kind of printed materials. I'll just stress for the artistic work samples and the additional support material, please do pay attention to our requirements. There are some limitations on how lengthy those items can be or the formatting they need to be in, and the grants team will have to remove things that are unallowable before the application can be eligible for panelists to adjudicate on that application. Okay, so now we're going to go forward to our review criteria, and I'm going to pass it over to Michelle to just run us through these different categories for PGO for panelist review.
Thanks, Stephanie. So supporting arts and cultural projects with community impact, panelists will evaluate all applications using the following criteria below. So A, you have project planning and management, which is worth 30 points. Then community impact and artistic merit, which is worth 40 points. And then C, we have the artistic excellence for 30 points. Supporting arts and cultural projects with community impact. We have this section A, which again, you'll find underneath our guidelines, project planning and management. So for the review criteria, project is well planned with a realistic timeline. So we want to make sure that this is not something that is a 5-year plan. We want to make sure that you're planning something that is within your capacity. You're also demonstrating clear and achievable goals, objectives, and outcomes. This project also involves qualified personnel to plan and manage the project, and then your budget that will reflect realistic costs and appropriate financial resources to support the project. The next section is community impact and the artistic merit, which is worth 40 points. So underneath this criteria, you will clearly identify and define your target audience. So there will be questions in there to really go into what your audience looks like. You'll also have to demonstrate how you're planning and reaching the and how you're communicating information to your target audience as well. You'll be demonstrating strategic planning towards inclusive and impactful engagement for the defined community, identifying methods to evaluate the success and the impact and the outcome for the targeted audience and the community. We also review how the project aligns with and supports the organization's missions and goals, and again, demonstrates a commitment to inclusion and accessibility. So for section C, artistic excellence, which is worth 30 points, this criteria asks that you utilize an effective process to select artists, arts professionals, groups, and or other elements of artistic production or presentation. Also, that you are demonstrating a commitment to artistic excellence as evidenced through the artists, arts professionals, and or groups associated with the project.
Thank you, Michelle. So we're gonna move forward, forge on to the operating support grant. And I just wanted to know, Bailey, I do see your question. We're just gonna wait until the end, like we said. So oops, we'll jump right into the operating support grant, or OSG. So the operating support grant, which supports core operations of arts organizations, as we said, the grant amount can be up to $50,000, meaning up to $25,000 per year, because it is a 2-year grant based on your annual revenue. So based on your organizational budget, and we'll look at that more closely as well. So the grant cycle, again, 2 years. Year 1, July 1, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. Year 2, July 1, 2026 to June 30th, 2027. And the operating support grant, right, is intended to strengthen Nevada's art infrastructure, supporting those general operating costs of nonprofits, arts organizations throughout the state. And the most competitive applicants, they're going to have applications that offer ongoing, sustained, accessible programs and art services or artistic programming for their communities. The operating expenses, which we have covered a little bit, but just to emphasize again, can include things like admin salaries and benefits, payroll expenses, insurance, facility space rental, utilities, contracted and professional services. We'll talk about that a little more, and please always feel free to reach out if you have budget questions like that, what can be included. Again, it's a 2-year cycle. So the process is that you submit the full application in always in an even fiscal year. And then the interim report is then submitted at the end of year 1. You go through year 2 and your final report is submitted at the end of year 2. Okay. So just drilling down again into eligibility, and you'll see in red highlighted things that are a little bit different from the project grant for organizations. So for OSG, the nonprofit organization must be based in Nevada. So no border states are eligible for the OSG, but you still have to have that federal tax exempt status from the IRS. You still have to have your UEI from SAM.gov and active incorporation status with the Nevada Secretary of State at the time of application. You have to show at least an annual total revenue of $10,000, and you will show that with your most recent IRS 990 form. So you upload that to the application to show your revenue to determine which level, which tier essentially you can apply for. Importantly, and different from the project grant for organizations, you have to have a mission that describes the arts as the primary purpose of the organization. So this is a crucial difference. You have to provide significant arts programs or services on a seasonal or ongoing basis throughout the year. So this grant does not fund organizations who have a single event in the year. So something like if you had a one-day event, a festival, an exhibition, you would be encouraged to apply to the project grant for organizations for something like that. That's discrete and limited project, as opposed to programming on an ongoing basis in a season or throughout the year annually. For levels 2 to 5, you have to have at least one paid part-time or full-time employee, and you have to demonstrate at least 3 previous years of effective arts-related programming. Okay, so in that application, what are you going to find? Now, the operating support grant application is not yet open. It will open 2 months in advance of the deadline. So if the deadline is July, it's going to open May 1st, I believe. Narrative questions are going to include things such as your mission, your history, your administrative structure. You'll include your current board members, key personnel, and succession planning. That is something that is new and an important change and update since last application cycle. Your program planning timeline and your current strategic plan, your current financial status, and the populations that you serve. You will also be required to submit an organizational budget table, which includes your past fiscal year, current fiscal year, and a projection of your future fiscal year, just to get a sense of your budget as an organization. You will also have to submit artistic work samples of some of the types of artistic programming that you do. And you also have space to, again, include some of that additional support material, marketing, evaluation forms, contracts, etc. And again, just with those last 2 artistic work samples and additional support material, please do pay attention to the requirements and guidance for each of those categories, because we do have some limitations on, for example, the page numbers, the page limit of materials that you are allowed to submit, or how artistic work samples should be formatted. And that, again, is just to support our panelists in their review. Okay, so now we're back again to our review criteria, and I'll ask Michelle to pop on and go through this with you all.
Thanks again, Stephanie. So we will go through how panelists will evaluate all applications using the criteria below. And again, they will review steps based on organizational capacity and management, worth 40 points, B, artistic excellence, worth 30 points, and C, community impact and artistic merit, again, worth 30 points. So section A, the organizational capacity and management, that review criteria provides evidence, or rather you will provide evidence of effective financial management and health. This includes maintaining appropriate budgets and a diversity of revenue sources. There will also be a review of evidence of qualifications and effectiveness of professional staff and board to support the organization's mission, programming, and your organizational services. Your organization, we will ask that you identify and describe methods to evaluate success, the impact in the community, and again, how the outcome affects the community and those services provided. And then also, there should be some evidence of succession planning. This is actually new this year. As we see things happen and unexpectedly. So we are asking this year not only about your succession planning, but also emergency planning and preparedness, because that is something that everyone should be thinking about, especially if you have an organization that you are running, and liability and all of those things should be things that you are prepared and thinking about as well. Our section B will focus on artistic excellence. And in this section, we are going to review how you demonstrate your commitment to artistic excellence as evidenced through your programming and or services. This also includes how you utilize artists, arts and design professionals, and arts educators as appropriate. Also, how you evaluate your process to select artists, services, programming, and other elements of production or presentation. And then also how the programming aligns with the organization's overall artistic vision and mission. So again, just making sure that all of those things align in terms of your mission and impact and the funding as well. And then section C, again, the community impact and artistic merit. In this section, we review, or rather what will be reviewed is the organization, how you clearly identify and define the demographics of the community that you are serving, your program, services, and activities of the organization, how that demonstrates a significant impact on the community. And again, we are looking towards how you are planning for inclusion and accessibility within your organization.
Okay, and now that we've gone through PGO and OSG, if you have any questions or if you want to learn more about our grant offerings, we are doing in-person workshops in the coming weeks across the state. So take a look at our schedule of events that are coming up. And if there's an in-person workshop near you, then we'd love to have you attend. Yeah, and I think now is probably a good time to go into questions. So if you want to drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A or raise your hand, we can take you off mic. But I think we'll start with Bailey's question since it's been in the Q&A. So I'll read it out. So when materials for the project fluctuate in price, like wood, consumables, etc., what are the procedures to address discrepancies between the receipts and the requested funds?
And I'm happy to answer that question. So we understand that during the application process, you are doing your best to project the costs, especially if things, like consumable materials and supplies, those can be variable. So what we're really looking for when you submit your receipts in the final report is just that you are kind of sticking to the categories, right? Say you put that you were going to spend $1,000 in consumable materials and supplies. It's okay if your receipts don't add up to $1,000. We understand that those change. What would be of concern, I think, is if you, added different kinds of costs that you had not added at all in your original budget. If we saw a major deviation in costs, types of costs, that would be a concern. However, you can submit a grant, a change request form at any time. So just reach out if there's going to be a major change to your project, not just with costs either. If there were a major date change, major personnel change, you would definitely want to reach out, submit a change request form, be reviewed by Nevada Arts Council staff, and we would work with you to hopefully approve that change request form so long as all the changes are allowable. Yeah, and let me know if that answered your question, Bailey, or not. Okay, I see another question. I'll go ahead and read this one aloud from Hava. Can you explain the one-to-one cash or in-kind detail in the PGO? Yeah, so this is a requirement for a number of our grants that we have a cash or in-kind match. What that means is that you would have to, at the time of application, show that you had either cash, say some kind of cash match, meaning it could be cash donations, it could be funding reserves from your organization, it could be a number of different sources, right, to be your cash match. That means real dollars, real money. However, we also accept in-kind donations as a match. What does that mean? It means that perhaps you are getting donations such as volunteer hours that you would track and calculate the value of. Maybe a donated space. There's a value associated with that space. Maybe donated goods and supplies. So all of those have a cash value, but you don't get actual cash. So you would put that in the in-kind section. And as long as that is at least meeting the same amount as your grant request, then that would meet the eligibility requirements. And I know that folks can get a little bit confused about that, where to put that in the budget, how to talk about it. And so I would, encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions as you're filling out the application. But it is a requirement for a number of our grants. And one thing I will say too is you may not use federal funding as a match for our grants. So if you are applying for another federal grant, or you have funds from which the source is federal funding, you may not use it as a match for our grants. And that is because our grants are part of our National Endowment for the Arts funding partnership. So they are already federal dollars. You cannot match federal dollars with federal dollars. That is a rule from the federal government. So please be aware of that, that you may not do that. And please reach out if you have more questions about how to do that in your budgets.
I'll start reading some off, Stephanie. So just Bailey has a follow-up. Thank you so much. Are there opportunities for feedback on a PGO grant before the February 3rd deadline?
Well, yeah, I think, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, Michelle. I guess it depends on what kind of feedback you mean.
Yeah, so we are not, so there is a review process. We have panelists that will come in and actually review. So we are not necessarily or technically allowed to give any sort of feedback that way, just because it will create a conflict of interest, being that we are the primary funders for the grant itself. But again, there's going to be an eligibility form that you'll fill out. And if there is anything that we see within that form that maybe strikes us as something that maybe you have to work on or something that you need to provide, we'll definitely get in touch with you, either the CAD team or the grants team as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Michelle. Yeah, I think those are great points. And actually, yeah, just to emphasize, I'm thinking in the webinar that these are panel reviewed applications. So we have external panelists that are selected that review and score the applications. These are not, the Nevada Arts Council staff only review for eligibility. So that is exactly what, kind of Michelle is saying, that there would be a conflict of interest for us to review in that way. So if you have past applications, you may have some panelist comments that would be feedback that we can provide for you as well. You can also reach out to us and listen to the audio recordings of past panels, which may be helpful just in general. I think it's anyone can attend our panels and listen in, and it's a great experience for feedback just in general. There are a lot of comments that panelists make that I think anyone can use.
Okay, we have Dane. I just want to confirm my understanding that an arts nonprofit may apply for both ALP and OSG, but not the PGO. However, a partner nonprofit could apply for PGO that host the nonprofit's program services.
Yeah, I think I could maybe jump in on that one. So you're correct, Dane, that if you, you can apply, you are welcome to apply for any of the grants that you wish, but you may not receive certain combinations of grants. So, for example, an operating support grantee may receive an arts learning project grant in the same fiscal year. So that is correct. We have a lot of pairings of that. But an operating support grantee cannot also receive a project grant for organizations the same fiscal year, and likewise for arts learning project grantees. So at that point, if you applied for a number of them, we would have to reach out and say, okay, here were the results. What would you like to accept? As for the second part, a partner nonprofit could apply for PGO that supports host the nonprofit's program services. Yeah, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, it is that the, say, operating support grantee or recipient, I should say, could be listed as a partner or be listed as a host in another applicant organizations, project grant for organizations application. Yeah, I'm going to tentatively say that is allowable. I think maybe we would want to discuss and maybe see what the funding breakdown was. Yeah, so we would want to just, I think that I would want to, yeah, just have a conversation and see what the parameters of that were before saying that it's absolutely allowable. So I would say definitely reach out if that is a situation.
Thank you. And from John, for the project support grant, can food that is being offered during the project for the attendees be included in the costs?
I'll also jump in on that one since it's a funding question. Yeah, so unfortunately, no. So any food or drink are not allowable costs ever for any of our grants. That is both restricted for federal funding and for state funding, which comprises of almost always all of our funding sources. So that would just, it's not that you can't serve food or have food, but it has to be from it cannot, our funds cannot be used to pay for it. If you submitted receipts for something like that, it would not be considered allowable. So just please keep that in mind when you are building your budget. And you do have a narrative question, like a question where you can talk about your budget to explain a little bit more if you needed to explain maybe some things like that in your budget, some particularities just to help panelists and Nevada Arts Council staff understand how you're paying for things.
Thank you. From Holly, if our organization would need to submit a change request form, should we discuss the change with staff before form submission?
I'll take that one again because usually, yeah, you can just reach out and chat with us. Feel free to call me, email me. You can also message us in Submittable just to give us a sense of what the changes are. And we can then determine if you do need the form. Some minor changes, kind of like what like Bailey's question earlier about some of the cost fluctuations. Yeah, something like that where, say, you said you were going to spend $1,000 in consumable materials and supplies, but actually you only spent 800, and those funds were shifted to another budget category that you had included in your original project budget. That would not require a change request form. But if you were adding a totally new category, such as you were not going to pay artist fees with our grant funds originally, but you, it turns out, have to use some of our funding for artist fees, that would be a pretty major change to the budget. So I, yeah, would in that case reach out really to any of us, Michelle, Lauren, myself, to see if that change might necessitate a form, and we can kind of discuss as a team and then make it available on Submittable for you to fill out for our review in detail if you do need to do that.
Okay, so thank you, Holly, and the rest are just thank yous.
Any other questions?
Just to note that we will be adding some additional workshops in person in Southern Nevada. We will be adding those and we'll be blasting those on social media. So just to let you know, there will be more.
Yeah, and there is a registration page on our website. If you go to our recent news section, there's a place for you to just let us know if you might be coming to the in-person workshops in either Northern Nevada or Southern Nevada, just so we can kind of get a head count and make sure that we have enough room space for everybody. So please do let us know if you plan to know. Registration is not required, but we really, really appreciate it. And there are other virtual workshops that are coming up in the next few weeks. We have our arts learning program area, folk life program area, area and artist services program area. They all have webinars very similar to this that where we'll talk about the grants associated with those program areas in depth in this same way. And those ones do not require registration. Those are virtual on Zoom. You can just use the link to click through and join the Zoom meeting at the time that it's being held. So please join us. We would love to share more about those specific grants, some of which are organizational, some of which are individual, and see what you might be eligible for and might want to apply for.
Any other questions?
And I'm just gonna close that slide. Okay. So I guess if there are no other questions, we can probably go ahead and end here. Yeah, thank you all for coming. And feel free to reach out, with the contact information that we had in the beginning, if you have any questions at all.
Thank you so much. And feel free to please join us for the Community Arts Development Next Professional Development Series on February 12th. It's going to be a trivia morning. Learn the difference between Nevada Humanities and the Nevada Arts Council. We have prizes. Come win the glory of what it is to know the difference. We'll see you there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.